came onto the market.
And that drug was called OxyContin.
This is the new drug after the morphine drug.
Was a nuclear weapon. It contained large amounts of a narcotic called oxycodone, which is part of the opioid family of drugs, which also includes heroin and morphine. So it was a pure, powerful narcotic that was many, many times stronger than any pain reliever that had preceded it on the market.
It seems like it would be very hard to get such a powerful drug, the nuclear narcotic, as you've described it, past federal regulators.
Well, Sacklers came up and Purdue came up with a brilliant strategy based on the nature of OxyContin itself. Traditional narcotic painkillers, drugs like Percocet and Vicodin, last for 4 hours. OxyContin lasts for 12 hours. The contin in OxyContin stands for continuous. So OxyContin was essentially a long-acting version of a painkiller. And the concept that Purdue presented to the FDA was simply this. Because it was a long-acting narcotic, it would have less appeal to people who like to abuse painkillers because they like to get a quick hit from a drug. So they'd be looking for drugs like Percocet or Vicodin, which acted more quickly, and they could get their hit from it more immediately than they could from OxyContin. And in late 1995, the FDA approves OxyContin. And as part of that approval, they give Purdue a unique marketing claim that the regulators had never given to any pharmaceutical company before. And that is the claim that essentially says that OxyContin, because it is a long-acting narcotic, is believed to pose less of a risk for abuse and addiction than traditional opioids.
This was a golden gift, the prescription from the federal government, that this, after being lobbied and presented with this information by these drug companies, this drug could solve the problem of painkiller abuse. That this drug would not be addictive because it was long-acting, and people who wanted to get high, they just wanted a quick hit, right? So they wouldn't go to this OxyContin drug for a long, extended hit. They would go to things like Vicodin, things like other things like less powerful but very quick and direct drugs that did not act for quite as long as of a time. But this assumption was quite incorrect, and just this little gift that the FDA was giving to this Purdue Pharma executive group here, they took it and ran miles with it.
So Purdue creates this drug, OxyContin. The FDA approves it, and it gives the company this kind of soft, ambiguous claim that the drug is believed to be less addictive than other narcotics. And then what happens?
Essentially, they take what is an equivocal claim and they turn it into an absolute claim.
We doctors were wrong in thinking that opioids can't be used long-term.
So they train their salespeople to go out to doctors and tell doctors that OxyContin will not cause abuse and addiction.
We used to think they'd stop working or the patients would become addicts.
That it's a totally unique drug, a safer drug, a better drug.
We now find that these medicines are much safer, much more powerful, much more versatile than we used to think, and we feel that they should be used much more liberally for people with all sorts of chronic pain.
It goes out and begins holding seminars throughout the country, hundreds of seminars where it flies in doctors for essentially all expense paid junkets at resorts.
I thought it would be nice to let you know what's going on in my specialty. As you know, I work in pain management.
Where they're proselytized about the undertreatment of pain and the need to treat pain more aggressively.
We usually undertreat pain We undertreat pain catastrophically. Very often we don't even recognize it. Very often we don't even acknowledge it. We refuse to acknowledge that the patient's hurting.
Essentially, what Purdue is doing is taking what have become standard marketing techniques for everyday common drugs. You know, cholesterol-lowering drugs, diabetes drugs.
And what they were able to do with these same techniques was to amplify it to such an incredibly high degree that they kind of created almost a miracle drug, a drug that would cure would pretty much do the same thing. It would be something you could easily take to cure pain. And that wasn't addictive, that was incredibly strong, that did give you a little bit of a high, but wasn't that addictive, and is not something that those crazy junkies off the street wouldn't go into. It just seemed like such a nice thing.
Tiny Purdue has turned into a powerhouse. And sales of OxyContin are skyrocketing. By the late 1990s, it's bringing in over $1 billion a year in sales.
This one drug.
And this one drug is accounting for virtually all of Purdue Pharma's revenues.
This drug seemed to be the drug that could cure all ailments for this pharmaceutical company. It was the drug that so many people seemed to just immediately and very quickly gravitate towards, but it was a drug that, according to the FDA, according to these doctors who had been trained and lied to by these Purdue sales professionals, that this drug was safe, that this drug was not addictive. Like, this drug was going to be one that was really kind of unstoppable in terms of its absolute dominance.
Barry, how do you become drawn into this story?
At this time in 2001, I had done a few stories about the drug industry, but I knew nothing about narcotic painkillers, drug addiction, and had never heard of Purdue Pharma.
So Barry Meyer, he kind of goes into a little bit of how he gets into this entire story, and he kind of gets into the backstory of how this whole situation, this relatively unknown family, the Sackler brothers, how they were able to rise to such an incredibly high situation. I mean, Mortimer, Raymond, Elizabeth, Isaac, Richard, I'm just naming names of people who are Sacklers at this point. But, these people, they were able to really kind of create a drug that did conquer the world here. And this whole entire scam was going on in this entire time. And, I mean, it seemed very nice. But one day, things kind of needed to be changed, just to say the least. And a New York Times editor came up to this guy at one point and had this to say.
For the Sacklers ever before. But on one day in 2001, an editor comes over to me and says that he's received a call from a source of his, a person who's working for a pharmacy board. And the story he relates is that there's this hot new drug on the street, this pharmaceutical that's being abused, that people are seeking, that's getting top dollar on the street. And what makes the situation particularly extraordinary is that Purdue Pharma is going around promoting this drug, OxyContin, as less prone to abuse and addiction. So the editor says to me, well, why don't you start making phone calls and try to figure out what's going on here?
And what did you hear when you started to make those calls?
What I start finding out is that
it's known as OxyContin, oxy, or hillbilly heroin.
All that was needed was to basically pop this drug in your mouth, and the entire narcotic payload that was contained within an OxyContin would be available for your immediate use.
Thefts of a drug, some say, can cause a high like heroin.
People were going crazy. It was a drug that was related to heroin, sold in stores for $1 to $2, but on the street worth $20 to $80. It was a drug that this is for just one pill, keep in mind. It was a drug that, I mean, so many people gravitated to immediately. There was thefts, there was burning down of stores, there was robberies of stores, as you're about to see. And it was something that was just completely out of control, and really a drug that just kind of took off from there. And it was all started by these three brothers who used deceptive and tricky marketing, lying to people in the government, FDA regulators, popularizing it, lying to doctors, people who we trust, to slip by the American safeguard system little by little. Just little by little. Think about all the steps they had to make to just slip by the system of numerous safeguards set up by American popular culture and society that would say, no, we don't want this drug in our labs. That's so dangerous and so deceptive. They sometimes, it's kind of almost like it sounds weird to bring a parallel to this, but this is the kind of story that comes to mind. It's almost a House of Cards-ing story, where some people really, with a lot of more real-life consequences, and over 200,000 ended up dead of overdoses from this deadly drug. And it was all people who wormed their way. They didn't come in by force. They came in seemingly completely lawfully and with no real problem on their hands, until things did get a little bit frisky by the end. And keep in mind, by that time, they were already incredibly rich from, again, just this one drug, Purdue Pharma was. And sooner or later, once this guy, Barry Meyer, he investigates in this, he talks to sources, he finds out all the misuse and the crime wave of the breaking in of stores, the robbing of homes, the assaulting of people who have been prescribed this OxyContin drug. He finds out eventually that just like a lot of these claims being made by these pharmaceutical companies are, and I quote here, completely inaccurate.
That the science behind those claims doesn't exist. And what I'm starting to observe is the coming together of a huge public health crisis.
We have a young lady that will not wake up. Is she breathing, sir? No, sir.
By the time emergency workers brought Shauna to the hospital, she was dead of an OxyContin overdose.
About 100 of the cases that we see every year now are oxycodone deaths, and about half of those are OxyContin-related deaths.
But federal drug authorities are increasingly concerned about the dangers to unsuspecting kids who take the pills as a party drug, having no idea what they're in for.
We'll be right back.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was you're listening to Spotlight. Thank you so much for sticking with us here today. There is a lot more to this story, and I'm going to let Barry Meyer tell it to you here from the Daily, because in my opinion, and I hope yours too, he's done a pretty amazing job so far.
Every business has a mission.
And Purdue Pharma's was to make money.
In 2001, executives of Purdue Pharma are called before Congress for a series of hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The article in yesterday's New York Times. Now, there are papers and there are newspapers. This one has a pretty decent reputation for its analysis of issues.
Barry Meyer's story was starting to pull in some weight. There was a committee hearing called, and these people, some of these chief executives, some of the people who have helped sell this poisonous, awful drug to so many different people across the country and helped enable it to become a street drug, help enable it to lead to not millions, but many, many, many overdoses and therefore way too many deaths. These people were possibly, maybe, finally being held into account.
Are they wrong? Because they weren't exactly nice to your company at all.
He's referring to the New York Times.
Which statement in particular were you referring to, sir?
It's clear to everyone by now that the abuse of OxyContin is widespread, And one of the questions that lawmakers have is,
well, the fact that your salesmen have been approached by pharmacists, for instance, and told that there was a problem. People understood it was all about making money and not necessarily about